Do you remember that mesh-filled case from Intertek we reviewed like 3 years ago? Well, you maybe don't, but I do, because it's like one of my most watched videos ever. Anyway, that doesn't matter, because for its days, and especially the price point, the IM-1 pocket was pretty awesome in my opinion. And this is the upgrade. This is the IM-2 expander, another very small micro ATX case, but in comparison to the first one, basically everything has become a lot better. Now, before we start, no sugarcoating. Here in the EU you can find this case under the name IM-2 expander from Intertek, but over on the US market you will also find one that looks pretty identical under the name IM-01 Pro. Now, it's not A copied from B situation, they just have the same supplier. So if anybody around the world finds a different name, or just comment down below under what name you can buy it where you live, so that everybody can have a look at the price of this thing wherever they are. But back to the case. The IM-2 expander comes in a standard Intertek style packaging, a brown carton box. However, inside, Intertek upgraded their own game. The styrofoam is a lot better, all the necessary screws are nicely organized in a box, and we got a carrying bag. Yeah, that thing fits exactly one Intertek expander. I can already see how an American will make this now a measuring unit. My grocery bag is 7/8 of an expander. And we got a surprise gift, to which we will come later on. Standing on the table, the IM-2 expander measures 396mm in depth, 206mm in width, and 328mm in height. Additionally, we got a bit of overhang in the back, because this PCIe bracket thing is just hanging out. The case is standing on relatively small but surprisingly sturdy feet. We got a bit of a rubber on the downside, which is nice, but as the case is just being lifted by like 0.8mm in the bottom, I would have wished for minimally higher feet. From the outside, the case is absolutely nothing but mesh. Left, right, top, front, bottom. Everything is covered by these small holes all around, and similarly to the IM-1, it is so easy to remove everything. Just pop it off at the top and then pull up. Very easy. The only one that is different is the front. There you have like 4 poppings, but the rest is just pop and pull. Now, contrary to the original IM-1, the compatibility or the spec sheet of the IM-2 is not a nightmare to explain. It's actually quite easy for once. Motherboard wise, we can go either with mini ITX or mATX, which is okay. It's a case made for that form factor. But who the hell decided which spacers to install? Don't get me wrong, you will get all the spacers you need to make whatever build you want to do, and you have enough in the additional screw box. Why is this screw not here? This is for micro ATX and this is for mini ITX. I would have understood if Intertek pre-installed the screws for mATX. I get it. Or mini ITX. I get that too. It doesn't matter, but decide for one. Don't go with 3 of one and 1 of the other, so that everybody in the world needs to like reposition at least one screw to make it work. This is so dumb. For the PSU, we can go with either SFX or ATX power supplies. By removing this bracket, which will later hide the cables, we got full access to this bracket. This is where the regular ATX power supply would go. At the absolute max, you could potentially install up to 270mm long PSUs until you start hitting the bottom bracket. So you don't want to do that. But you need to keep in mind that even with cables, after about 160mm, you will start hitting where a potential GPU would be. So try to stay underneath 160 even with cables. Of course, you can loosen these screws that keep the bracket in place and then push it a bit up, but you don't have that much space above it, and you still need to connect that extension cable that comes out in the back of the case, which by the way just looks like somebody decided last minute that this is a great spot for power supply cable, and they just put it there. So for me, I would still say stay underneath 150mm long PSUs. That's the safe route. Alternatively, but limiting the GPU heavily, we can remove the whole bracket and reinstall it in the bottom while turning it around, which does work. It may require like the stupidest extension cable route ever, and I just don't recommend it. It's just stupid. Leave it at the top. Or just go with SFX. For that we can get rid of this bracket and use this space. Using this one we can mount up to 160mm long PSUs, including the cables. But considering that SFX power supplies are generally a lot shorter, this is like the way to go. For the GPU, I was pretty amazed. We got about 375mm that we can use to max it out, and in depth we have about 175, so no problem for the NVIDIA Octopus, and this means that my 4090 fits perfectly in here. That this was meant to happen. But the expander has something extra for us here. This GPU anti-sag bracket. You can move it up or down, left or right, or remove it if you don't need it. Great. For the max CPU cooler height, it's about 167 to 168mm tops, which is okay considering the size. Now coming to these brackets, we got two of them. One in the top and one in the bottom. And my best description for these would be, I can do everything bracket, but like in the stupidest way possible. We can fit 3 120mm or 2 140mm fans on here, or on each. The 120s even have alternative positions, which is great. And that was kind of the good part. Then we can install up to 2 hard drives if we install them towards the center and then the plugs pointing either outwards or inwards, which is like really freaking stupid because you would need to like route them. It's like the stupidest thing ever. Or we can do basically the same thing with SSDs. The thing about the SSDs though, there are only 2 spots where the holes on the brackets are corresponding with the industry standard. So you got per bracket 2 SSDs totaling 4, which is like really freaking stupid. I do not understand why there are not more holes to mount a ton of SSDs, like with the cable coming out towards the back. That would have been so much smaller. You could stack them like crazy. And in the end, the bracket is just so overfilled with rails and holes, but at the same time with so much metal that it is just generally not great for airflow. I mean, it is multi-purpose. I get that. But there is so much restriction in the middle that it kind of defeats the purpose at this point. And in my opinion, it's just over-engineered. If I would redo it, I would remove everything except the 120 and 140 rails and then have like optional rails that the user can mount to these 120 or 140 rails and then mount the 2.5 inch or 3.5 inch drives to that, giving the option, freeing the whole central part, and you could mount way more SSDs to that. But by default, in the top and bottom, 2 2.5 or 2 3.5 inch drives, so a max of 4 or 3 120s or 2 140s, top and bottom, so 6 or 4, which is okay. Given the size, it's still okay. But if you are comfortable mounting SSDs using only 3 screws, because those things weigh like nothing, you can cheat your way around and use like whatever rails you can find and squeeze like 4 onto the bracket. And to make it even better, because the holes in the front are aligned perfectly, you can even use them to squeeze like 3 or maybe even 4 on there, so... But don't tell Intertech. To finish off the cooling, in the front we have a theoretical 2 120mm spots, but you will never be able to use both or sometimes any. Because of the PSU and how it's located, and because the GPU is there, the PSU, it doesn't make any sense to mount a fan in front of it. It will do nothing. And in front of the GPU, you A, immediately lose the anti-sag bracket, and B, depending on the GPU, it just won't fit there. So there are 2 spots, but sometimes usable, sometimes not. And in the back, we got another regular 120mm spot, where the fans can be repositioned to the absolute top, because somebody thought this would be a great spot for the cable. And that's the reason why I think this was like a last-minute addition, because the cable just blocks the fan. Coming to the I/O, which is surprisingly good. A relatively clicky start button accompanied by a combined audio in and out, 2 USB-A in 3.2 Gen 1 and 1 USB Type-C 3.2 Gen 2. And actually, the I/O isn't permanently fixed to the bottom right corner. You can remove both screws and then reposition it to the top left, and because the outside is nothing but mesh, you can just switch that around and nobody will notice. But don't do that after the build. Believe me, you need to pull out all of the cables, and you don't want to do that once you are done building. That would be a nightmare. But before we finish the I/O, the plug for the start button and its LED is a single plug. Great job, Intertech. Everybody hates these. This is a nightmare. This is great. And this was pretty much it for a base version of the IM-2 expander. But before we get to the not so baseline option, I got an honorable mention. Very similar to the IM-1 Intertek forgot to mention that this thing is actually reversible. You can attach the panel containing the feed to the top and then vice versa, flip the whole thing around and voila, your PC can now be facing the wall on the left side, not the right side, which... Why didn't they mention that? Just don't forget to turn the anti-sag bracket around, otherwise you are going to push the GPU down. And as a last point about the base edition, cable management is on the harder end. Of course it is. We got about 1.5 millimeters behind the motherboard plate, so even the plethora of zip tie slots won't make it perfect. It is not as hard as it seems. We have a lot of hardware in here and it worked just fine, but be ready that in the back at least, it's a very squishy situation. But the holes are big around the motherboard, so getting cables into the main compartment is excellent. But in the back it's squishy. And with that, this was it for the IM-2 part of the case, and coming to the expander. As you might have noticed, I haven't talked at all about water cooling support, and in theory you can install 240s or even maybe 280mm radiators in the bottom and the top, and 120s in the back, but already a single fan limits the amount of hold you have left for your cables, and adding a radiator will pretty much close off the holes completely. And at some point you will just start hitting stuff, so not really recommended if it wasn't for the special gift. This is an expansion unit and these are like really cool. You can take one of them, pop them onto the top or the bottom, providing you with an additional 35mm worth of space. Just make sure to screw them in after the fact in the back, otherwise you will just rip them off as soon as you lift the case by it. But what's really cool about them, each of them has the same 120 or 140mm rails, and the whole interior is removable as well. From the original top we can just remove the whole bracket, providing us with much more space for a full AIO. Even in push-pull. Or if you want to go crazy, you could also be like adding radiators in the bottom and the top and do like a custom thing, and you can go completely crazy and stack as many of them as you want. So by adding a single bracket we get 35mm, which can be used for 3 120s, 2 140s, the 2 SSDs or hard drives, or 4 if you just mount them using 2 screws. But this is gold. If you want to enhance cooling, do so. If you want to build a small monster NAS and just stack more and more hard drives on top, just add more and more and more of them and add more drives as you go. There are still some challenges, like there is no proper cable management path from the top bracket into the main compartment. So you will need to go through the bracket or through the rails thing in the middle. And this is especially important if you got, for example, hard drives on let's say the top one and 3 120mm fans on the bottom one. Yeah, that won't work because you can't get the SATA cables through. So what you would need to do is have the fans at the very top, and because the drives are not filling out the plate completely, you have a bit of space to route the PWM cables through that. So there is a order to do things here. But nevertheless, I believe this is awesome. If you want to go crazy, 60mm push-pull, very thick radiators, do whatever you want, you can go crazy. By default, a IM-2 comes with one of these expansions included in the box, which I didn't know, which is why I requested 2 additional ones, so now I got 3, which is kind of overpowered for the build I did, but it's still, I used 2. And the build that we did in here is a 7950X3D, I'll just open this maybe. The build that we did in here, this is a 7950X3D, cooled by a iSpec thermal, what is it, Ice Gale, Ice Sleet, where is the box? Ice Flow Oasis 240 in push-pull using the same fans here hidden inside the top, so you don't see it if you look at it from like a straight angle. You need to go down to see it. This is amazing. In the bottom we got 3 more of these Ice Gale Lightning fans. We got a fully fledged 4090. And this whole thing, I couldn't get it to thermal throttle. With Firmark running at 4K and that CPU burner test from Firmark, the CPU was sitting at like 10 degrees below TJ max. And the GPU was at like 67 at max. And the mesh is very like airflow let through. Great job here. As a product, I like the case a lot. I also like the IM-1 back then. That one was pretty cool. But this is definitely an update, like better airflow, more configuration possibilities, crazy builds by stacking more and more units. Not everything is perfect, of course. The fan brackets could have been like slightly better designed, and I believe this cable is just, that's a DIY solution. Then we got the dust situation. There is no dust filter involved. I don't necessarily see that as such a big problem, because let's be honest, everything is just mesh, so just blow it through and it will come out in the back. So that's not that big of a deal, but dust can quickly get in there. As for the quality, I believe it's perfectly fine. Of course, it flexes a bit if you push really hard, also on the interior, but once all components are in, everything is like very, very stiff. And I gotta say, the pop mechanic of these is amazing. Like, also in the back, with all of the cables that are like very pushing against it, doesn't flex at all. So quality-wise, great. And design-wise, I like it, but that's really up to you to decide. What I'm going to say regardless is that we have the usual Intertech issue, where the images online just look hideous. The metal parts are looking like unpainted, and in reality it's much better. It's mattish black. I hope you can see them in the B-rolls. I hope you can see how well it looks in comparison to like the official images, but it doesn't look like on the website. And of course, no manual. There is literally no manual, nothing in the box, nothing online. No matter where I looked, nothing, which is really bad, because a thing like this just needs a manual, an extensive one. But it is not as hard as it was inside of the IM-1. There it was like really hard to understand. This was much easier to work with, much easier. But still, and in general, if you compare the IM-1 to the IM-2, where back then I really liked the IM-1, but that one was like, in comparison, just a little bit of mesh, and this is like just mesh. And a few tips I can give you if you want to build in this. If you want to mount a 240mm radiator in the top, in push-pull, you will need to have at least 2 of these extension units in the top. Not because one doesn't fit, but because you will at some point hit the PSU, or the tubes will hit the PSU, and you can't get it to all the back, because otherwise you will start hitting the cable. So in a configuration with only a radiator and a fan, 1 expansion unit works. If you want to do push-pull, you need 2. And it also hides the whole block, which is just looking amazing. And the most important information I can give you, the extension cable that is inside of here, you need to push it in really hard, like with force. That thing goes in very deep, and it may look like it's connected, but it's not. You need to push it a bit deeper. And another small thing, a huge thank you to Intertech for the updated PCIe cover. I remember that on the IM-1 there was a magnet so strong that it always pulled the screwdriver and then just instantly hit the case, and it was just demagnetized. Now there is still a ridiculously strong magnet, but it's on the side that goes away from the case. So thank you for that. And as a last recommendation, go with SFX. The benefits of nowadays going with SFX, if you can, in a case like this, so much more space, and let's be honest, you can get a 750, 800, 1000 watts SFX power supply, which there are a lot of great options out there, and if you want to have an easier time in this, go with SFX. Now let's talk about price. It's fine. I can get one right here and now for 72 euros, which is really okay. It's not as ultra low as the IM-1, but this thing can also do a lot more than the IM-1, so I do understand the higher price. For the expansion units, however, apart from the one that you can get for free, I found them on Mindfactory, which is a German reseller, where they are selling them for 688. Which is just a joke. I have no idea how they can be so affordable. So price-wise, as a platform, including one extension, I can absolutely stand behind that. If you're looking for a very good micro ATX or mini ATX case with like space for the biggest GPU and big as 280mm radiators in push-pull if you add one, it's okay for the price, it really is. But okay, this should be all for the Intertech IM-2 expander, and at this point a huge thank you to Intertech for sending it over. Oh, on a side note, we have a Discord server, so if you want to join, the link is down below. And we got channel membership, so if you are planning to sell your soul for an RG poop emoji, that's one way to go. But if not, I'm also releasing the content to all members 2 or 3 weeks in advance. except for the NDA stuff, because, you know, I don't want to get sued. Additionally, you can rest assured that the income will not only keep the channel afloat, but will also serve to get myself like 50 of these. 25 underneath, 25 on top, all of them filled with P14 Maxes, and we got a floating PC. How can that go wrong? Anyway, thank you for watching, but if you want to continue, have a look at the Iceberg thermal AIO that we used in here. That thing was surprisingly awesome, and it keeps a 7950X3D at bay without even being loud. So it's like a great AIO. Anyway, hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.